Tasha Cole, a very beautiful, tall, curvy, dark-skinned woman admired by everyone in the neighborhood, carried herself like a goddess sculpted by fire and grace. Her glowing melanin, round hips, and alluring figure made heads turn wherever she went. But behind the walls of her Oceanview Estate mansion, her beauty was wasted. Her husband, Daniel Cole, a wealthy real estate mogul in his late 40s, owned half the properties along the Granville City shoreline. To the outside world, he was a loving husband and perfect provider, but behind closed doors, Tasha was starved. Starved of his time, his attention, and worst of all, his touch. She craved intimacy, craved his arms around her at night, craved simple conversations and stolen kisses like they used to share before success swallowed him whole. But Daniel had changed. Business became his first wife, profit his mistress, and endless boardroom meetings his addiction. Almost every evening, Tasha would try to sit close to him, placing her soft hand on his chest, hoping he would understand without words. She would cuddle him gently, wanting to gist about her day, her dreams, her fears. But each time he would brush her off with an irritated sigh. "Tasha," he'd say coldly, "not tonight. I'm tired." Sometimes he'd laugh dryly and accuse her of wanting too much. "Do you ever get tired of this? You act like you're addicted to sex." Those words cut deep. They left bruises where no one could see. She'd lie awake in their massive king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding in quiet frustration, knowing that the man she loved treated her hunger for closeness like a burden. Nights became lonelier. Weeks bled into months. And eventually, her body stopped asking, but her heart never stopped yearning. She bought toys to fill the void. A sleek vibrator, a pink dildo, things she thought would solve her problem. But they were cold, mechanical, empty. No matter how much she tried, nothing replaced his hands, his scent, his breath against her neck. Until one humid evening, as she stood by the upstairs balcony overlooking the compound, she saw Caleb, the young gateman, washing Daniel's SUV under the fading sunset. Sweat dripped down his toned arms, his dark skin glistened under the soft orange light, and his white t-shirt clung tightly to his athletic chest. Something stirred inside her. It shocked her, scared her, thrilled her, all at once. "No," she whispered to herself, shaking her head as if to drive the thought away. "Not him, never him." But loneliness does strange things to the mind. Temptation is louder when the heart is hungry. That night, Tasha lay awake again, staring at Daniel's side of the bed, cold, untouched, and empty. Her fingers clenched the silk sheets as memories of Caleb's body flashed uninvited into her mind. She cursed herself. She fought it. She prayed it away. But the next day it happened. Daniel had left for a late-night board dinner, and the house was quiet except for the distant hum of the ocean breeze. Tasha wandered down to the kitchen for wine, but her feet carried her further, out into the compound, where Caleb sat outside the boys' quarters, scrolling on his cheap phone under the soft glow of the security light. He stood immediately when he saw her approaching. "Good evening, madam," he greeted, his deep baritone voice smooth and respectful. She nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice softer than usual. "Relax, I just came to check the compound." He hesitated, unsure, then sat back slowly. She stopped a few feet away, folding her arms, her robe slipping slightly at the shoulder. His eyes darted away quickly, focused on the ground, his hands trembling slightly. "Madam, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice low. Tasha stared at him for a long moment. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to walk away, to leave, to climb the stairs back to her lonely bed. But instead, she stepped closer. "Caleb?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Yes, madam?" Her lips parted, her chest rising and falling, and before she could stop herself, the words slipped out. "Come inside." For a heartbeat, the world stopped. Even the ocean breeze seemed to freeze in the air. "Madam, Please," she interrupted, her voice breaking, soft but firm. "Just this once." Caleb's breath quickened, his hands clenching tightly at his sides, torn between duty and desire. But when her fingers brushed against his, everything unraveled. What was supposed to be once became twice. What was supposed to be a mistake became a pattern. What was supposed to be forbidden became addiction. Weeks turned into months. Tasha and Caleb became sneaky lovers, stealing fragments of time whenever Daniel was away. In the boys' quarters, in the empty guest rooms, even in the car parked under the garden trees when the compound was silent at midnight. The thrill was intoxicating. The danger was addictive. But danger always comes with a cost. One rainy afternoon, as Tasha stared at a small pregnancy test kit in the upstairs bathroom, 2 red lines appeared. Her trembling hand covered her mouth as silent tears streamed down her face. She was pregnant. For a moment, relief washed over her. Finally, after years of trying, she would give Daniel the children he always wanted. But deep down, a quiet terror gnawed at her soul. She didn't know whose they were. Weeks later, the doctor smiled gently during the ultrasound and said, "Congratulations, Mrs. Cole. You're carrying twins." Twins. She forced a smile, nodded, and clutched Daniel's hand as he beamed with pride. But inside, her chest burned with fear. Little did she know, Caleb's family carried a dangerous genetic blood disorder, one that would soon shatter her world. Because on the night she gave birth at St. Mary's Medical Center, the twins came early, fragile, struggling to breathe. The doctors rushed them to the NICU, panic rising like waves. And when Daniel volunteered for a blood transfusion to save their lives, the doctor hesitated, then said softly, "Sir, we can't use your blood." Daniel froze. "Why?" The doctor sighed deeply, his voice trembling. "Because you're not the father." The word hung in the room like smoke. Not the father. Daniel did not argue. He did not shout. He simply stared at the doctor as if comprehension were a door he could refuse to open. Beyond the glass, a nurse adjusted tiny tubes on a smaller-than-life chest, and the machine answered with a fragile green line that trembled and steadied, trembled and steadied. "We need compatible blood now," the pediatrician repeated, softer this time, as if speaking to someone holding a very thin cup. "Sir, we will run yours again for protocol, but we must test another donor at once." A second nurse was already dialing the number on the admissions form, the one marked Caleb Security. She did not look at anyone while she spoke, her voice brisk and unsentimental. Tasha lay in recovery with a blanket tucked up to her waist and her hairline damp. Morphine softened the edges of her face, but not the guilt that had clawed its way there. She reached for Daniel's hand and found air. When she turned her head, he was gone from the doorway, a tall shadow shifting down the corridor toward the neonatal unit. Caleb arrived with rain on his shoulders, breathless from sprinting across Oceanview's empty midnight roads and through St. Mary's sliding doors. He was still in his gatehouse shirt, the pocket stitched with a name that did not feel large enough for the moment he stepped into. He did not ask questions. He rolled up his sleeve and held out his arm like an apology. The lab technician swabbed, drew, labeled, vanished. Minutes lengthened until they were rope. Daniel did not sit. He stood by the glass where a nurse's hand, steady and small, pressed on the heel of an infant's foot, coaxing a drop of blood into a capillary tube that looked like a straw for ghosts. When the technician returned, there was no ceremony in his nod. Compatible. One word. The kind that moves a room. They hung the bag on a stainless hook, and the scarlet line began. The baby's skin, a too pale brown, warmed by degrees. The beeping settled into the kind of rhythm that makes strangers cry behind their hands. Only then did Daniel look at Caleb. The younger man's gaze was low, as if the floor had become the kind of sky you study for omens. No one spoke. A nurse thanked him the way nurses thank miracles that arrive late and still in time. Tasha asked for water. The cup shook against her lip. "Are they alive?" the nurse said gently. "Fighting." When Daniel walked into her room, the overhead light hummed and held its breath. He stood just inside the door, neither close nor far. Tasha reached for him again, but the space between them had learned a new geometry. "I am sorry," she whispered. The words were small and true and too late. He nodded once, the way people nod at a grave. Rest, he said. He did not ask why. He did not list nights or names or places. Some reckonings are taller than language. That night, Daniel drove back to Oceanview Estate alone, his mind spinning with silent storms. Every laugh, every promise, every kiss replayed in his head, now poisoned by betrayal. The heavy door of Oceanview Estate closed behind them with a soft click, but the silence inside the mansion was louder than any sound. The air was thick, heavy, charged with an anger Daniel was holding back like a storm contained behind glass. Tasha stood just a few feet away, her breathing uneven, her hands trembling at her sides. She wanted to speak, to explain, but Daniel's stare pinned her in place like a shadow that couldn't move. He didn't shout. That was what terrified her most. Daniel moved slowly, each step measured, controlled, his face expressionless but his jaw tight, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. He walked past her and stopped by the large window overlooking the compound, his broad shoulders rising and falling as though he was holding back an entire ocean. "Who?" he finally asked, his voice deep, low and steady, the kind of calm that burns more than rage ever could. Tasha swallowed hard, her throat dry, her lips trembling. "Daniel, please." Who?" he repeated, this time sharper, cutting her words in half. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, she almost said his name. Almost. But guilt chained her tongue, and silence gave her away. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, jaw tightening, then turned to face her. His expression carried something colder than fury, disappointment. "It's Caleb." Her tears fell, but she didn't deny it. That was answer enough. Daniel's chest rose sharply, his breaths ragged now, his hands shaking though his body remained still. "My gate." He stopped, biting down on the word, forcing himself to breathe. "The man I pay to guard my house? You bring him into my bed?" "It wasn't like that," she whispered weakly. "Don't," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "Do not insult my intelligence, Tasha." The silence stretched, breaking only with the faint hum of the AC and the distant crash of the waves outside the estate walls. Somewhere upstairs, the twins stirred softly in their nursery, completely unaware of the storm tearing through the home they just entered. Daniel finally moved to the bar counter and poured himself a drink, his hand steady this time. He downed the whiskey in one gulp, set the glass down, and leaned against the counter, his back to her. "I gave you everything," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Every single thing you ever wanted. This house, this life, the freedom to live like a queen. And yet, you chose him." Tasha stepped forward, her voice cracking. "You stopped seeing me, Daniel. You shut me out. I begged for your attention, your love, your time, but you were always too busy. I felt invisible in this house." He turned sharply, his voice rising for the first time. "So you gave yourself to my gateman?" The sound echoed through the mansion, bouncing off the marble floors and glass walls. Tasha flinched but didn't look away. Her tears streamed freely now, her shoulders trembling. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she cried. "I was lonely, and I made a mistake, just once. But it became a mistake that gave me children that are not mine." Daniel snapped, his voice sharp, raw, and heavy. She froze, her lips parting as if to speak, but nothing came out. He stepped closer, towering over her now, his deep voice laced with hurt. "I looked at those babies, Tasha, my heart broke because I thought I'd finally have something pure in this world. But the blood doesn't lie." Tasha sobbed quietly, her knees weakening beneath her. She sank onto the leather sofa, burying her face in her palms, but Daniel didn't comfort her. His silence was a wall she couldn't climb. Then came the knock at the door. Caleb stood there, cap in hand, uniform damp with sweat. "Sir, I came to check on the twins." Daniel stared at him for a long moment, a silence so deep it made Caleb shift uncomfortably. Then, slowly, Daniel crossed the room until he stood just a breath away. "Look at me," he said quietly. Caleb hesitated, then raised his head. What he saw in Daniel's eyes wasn't anger. It was something worse. A calm so deadly, It froze him in place. "You," Daniel said slowly, each word deliberate, "will pack your things tonight and leave this house." "Sir, please." "Leave," Daniel repeated, his voice steady, firm, and final. Caleb's shoulders slumped. He nodded once, lowered his gaze, and walked out without another word. Daniel turned away, walking up the stairs slowly, his voice low and cracking. "This house will never be the same again." The days after Caleb's departure crawled like shadows across the marble floors of Oceanview Estate. Silence settled over the mansion, but it wasn't peace. It was the quiet weight of betrayal. Daniel moved through the house like a ghost, present but unreachable, his face unreadable, his words clipped and measured. Tasha tried to speak to him several times, but each attempt ended with the same cold distance. Nights were worse. They slept in separate rooms now, the emptiness between them stretching wider than the mansion's endless hallways. Daniel spent most of his time at the hospital with the twins. He sat beside the tiny cribs, watching their small chests rise and fall. The beeping monitors became his companions, and every soft cry pierced through him like a blade twisting deeper. Nina became the quiet strength of the household. She ensured the mansion ran smoothly, managed the staff, prepared meals Daniel rarely touched, and handled the twins' care schedules with precision. Barrister King visited, bringing divorce papers. "You'll be allowed access to the twins," he explained gently, "but Mr. Cole has requested no contest." Tasha barely heard him. The papers blurred before her eyes. Her 10-year marriage, her entire life, was ending, and she was the one who lit the match. That night, she stood at the nursery doorway, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Daniel walked past her without stopping. "Don't wake them," he said flatly. The sun dipped low over Oceanview Estate, bathing the white walls of the mansion in soft orange light. Yet inside, the air was cold, heavy, and silent, the kind of silence that carried the weight of unspoken words. It had been 3 weeks since the divorce papers were signed, but Daniel still felt like a man living among ghosts. Every hallway, every room, every polished marble surface seemed to echo memories that refused to stay buried. He sat alone in his study, his tall frame leaning back in the leather chair, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. The faint hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, but his thoughts were louder. On the desk before him lay a folder from St. Mary's Medical Center, the twins' medical reports. Dr. Uma's voice still echoed in his mind. "The babies are stable, but Caleb's family carries a genetic blood disorder. You'll need constant monitoring." Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. He had built an empire brick by brick, conquered markets, and tamed chaos in boardrooms. Yet here he was, a man undone by secrets, betrayal, and bloodlines he couldn't control. Upstairs, the twins slept soundly, their tiny breaths rising and falling in rhythm. They were innocent, untouched by the storm swirling around them. But every time Daniel looked at them, a hollow ache gnawed at his chest. They were his children in every way that mattered, yet they were not his blood. Tasha, meanwhile, had become a shadow of herself. The once vibrant woman who ruled Oceanview like a queen now moved through the mansion quietly, her sharp features dulled by sleepless nights and endless regret. Some nights, Daniel heard her muffled sobs behind the door of the downstairs suite, but he never knocked. One evening, she approached him hesitantly, clutching a folder from the hospital. Her voice was soft, trembling. "Daniel, there's something you need to know." He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "What now?" She held out the folder with shaking hands. "Caleb's blood disorder. The twins might have inherited it. They'll need special monitoring, maybe even treatment in the future." Daniel froze, his jaw tightening. "You brought this into my house," he said quietly, his voice steady but laced with pain. "You didn't just betray me, Tasha. You put my children's lives at risk." Tasha's tears spilled freely now. "They're your children too," she whispered desperately. "Blood or not, they need you." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. His chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. Finally, he nodded once. "I'll protect them," he said softly. I always will. From the doorway, Nina entered quietly, carrying a fresh set of hospital files. She had become the invisible thread holding Daniel's world together, managing schedules, coordinating treatments, and keeping the household running seamlessly. The specialists will be here next week, she said softly, handing Daniel the folder. I've arranged appointments for the twins. Everything is covered. Daniel took the file from her, his fingers brushing hers briefly. It was a small moment, but it carried weight. Nina's quiet strength had become his anchor, though neither of them said it aloud. Tasha watched the exchange, her chest tightening with a mix of longing and regret. Slowly, painfully, she began to realize she had lost more than a husband. She had lost the man who once built her a kingdom. 2 weeks later, the divorce became public. The media storm hit like thunder. Blogs, tabloids, and evening broadcasts all carried the headlines. Billionaire Tasha Cole ends 10-year marriage amid scandal. Oceanview Estate secrets. Infidelity, twins, and betrayal. Journalists camped outside Oceanview's gates, hungry for a photo, a quote, a soundbite. Business associates whispered in boardrooms, and former friends feasted on gossip disguised as sympathy. Through it all, Daniel remained silent. He refused interviews, ignored the cameras, and moved quietly, deliberately, rebuilding his life piece by piece. Oceanview Estate transformed under Nina's careful management. The nursery became the heart of the home, soft lamps glowing at night, the twins' gentle coos filling the silence. Daniel spent long evenings by their cribs, watching their tiny fists curl around his finger, feeling a strange, unfamiliar calm wash over him. Tasha, meanwhile, packed her things slowly, one suitcase at a time. On her last evening at Oceanview, she stood outside the nursery door, her hand resting against the frame. She watched the twins sleep for a long moment, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniel stepped into the hallway behind her, his voice low but steady. It's better this way. She turned slightly, her lips parting to speak, but no words came. Instead, she nodded once, wiped her tears, and walked away without looking back. Downstairs, the sound of her suitcase wheels rolling across the marble floor echoed faintly, then faded. Later that night, Daniel stood on the balcony, overlooking the glittering skyline of Granville City. The cool ocean breeze brushed against his face as Nina joined him silently, carrying a tray with tea. You've hardly eaten today, she said softly, placing the tray down. Daniel exhaled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Sometimes I wonder how I missed the signs. You trusted her, Nina said gently. That's not weakness, sir. That's love. For the first time in months, Daniel smiled faintly, small, fragile, but real. Oceanview Estate, once drowning in betrayal, breathed again. The wounds hadn't fully healed, but within those walls peace had begun to return.